He was just a boy, standing behind a rusted chain-link fence. She was just a factory worker in a faded coverall, used to blending into the background. All she did was break her sandwich in half and place it gently on a piece of cardboard. She didn't think anyone would notice. She wasn't looking for thanks. But that moment, that quiet, ordinary moment, was the beginning of everything. That day, it wasn't just a child's life that changed. It was an entire system that had long forgotten what compassion looked like. Welcome to Heartland Stories. I'm Ethan Hale, and here I share true stories about honor, kindness, and quiet strength. And today, I want to tell you a story that began at a factory fence. A story where a simple act of kindness proved stronger than every written rule. It's about a woman whose heart followed a deeper code than any policy manual, and how one quiet conscience managed to shake a whole system built on authority. Ready to find out how an ordinary factory worker became a hero to the United States Marine Corps? Then hit that like button, and let's get into it. Caroline Murphy lived in Lawrenceville, a town where streets knew you by name, and the rhythm of the week felt like it had been pinned to the wall at the local diner since forever. She was 27, not young, not old, just a woman used to keeping her head down. She woke up every morning at 5 a.m. before a single porch light flickered on. The kettle hissed quietly in the kitchen, while slices of turkey waited on wax paper, one sandwich for her, one for her dad. Mr. Murphy, an aging veteran, still worked part-time at the hardware store across the street. Not for the money, for the rhythm. Her 16-year-old sister, Lauren, with a book under her pillow, was usually still asleep, shifting gently in the early morning quiet. Caroline moved through the house like breath through lace. She ate standing up, checked her father's meds, packed Lauren's school bag, and made sure her own thermos was sealed tight. Then she walked the short route to the factory, across the bridge, past the park benches still crusted with frost. She'd been with Ford Steel Manufacturing nearly 5 years. Assembly line. Routine, rhythm, reliability. No tardiness, no complaints, no drama. She didn't get invited to after-work drinks. No one asked her opinion in meetings. She wasn't the voice in the room. She was the one who quietly refilled your coffee or offered a spare scarf when the wind bit. People were used to her, like they were used to the hum of machines. Steady, quiet, dependable. But every person has a depth you can't see from the hallway. Caroline had that depth. Quiet, unseen, but far from empty. And soon, the world around her would learn that her silence didn't come from weakness. It came from strength. That day, the lunch break at Ford Steel was even shorter than usual, just 15 minutes. Foreman Blake's son barked the announcement as he stepped out onto the back lot, where steam curled from mugs and thermoses under a corrugated tin awning. Rush order today. Let's keep it tight, he snapped, slapping a folder down on the table. Workers crammed around the picnic tables, elbows bumping. The air was sharp, mist clinging to their jackets, and the metal benches slick with dew. Steam drifted upward from soup lids like slow breath in the cold. Caroline unwrapped her sandwich, turkey, cheddar, and homemade mayo. She popped the lid off her thermos and poured rich chicken soup, the kind her dad always said tasted like something you could lean on. And then she saw him. He was standing just beyond the fence, soaked to the bone, dirt streaked across his face, maybe 10 years old at most. His jacket hung limp, far too thin for the cold. His sneakers were soaked, the laces caked in dried mud. Hair plastered to his forehead. But it wasn't his clothes that caught Caroline's eye. It was the look. His eyes, hollow, rimmed red from wind and tears. He didn't speak, didn't wave. He just stared. Not at the people, at the food. One hand clutched his stomach. His fingers trembled. Hey. Blakeson's voice sliced through the lunch chatter. Private property, kid. Move along before I call the cops. The boy flinched but didn't move. Blakeson strode toward the fence, clipboard in hand, waving it like a threat. No panhandling here. You hear me? Get out of here. Around the tables, workers buried their faces in sandwiches. A cough, a forced swallow, eyes shifting away. No one moved. Caroline felt her chest tighten. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Without a word, she broke her sandwich in half, wrapped one piece carefully in a napkin. She glanced over. Blakeson had turned his back, grumbling over a stack of forms near the wall. Quietly, Caroline stood. stepped toward the fence, knelt, and placed the wrapped half sandwich on an old piece of cardboard by the chain link. "You've lost your mind," Joan whispered from behind her. "Blakeson's gonna eat you alive. He's hungry." "That's not a crime," Caroline replied, barely above a whisper. The boy didn't move, still frozen. But now he was looking at her, not like she was a savior, more like he wasn't sure she was real. She gave him a small nod, "Go ahead," then turned 3 steps back toward her seat. "Murphy!" The shout cracked across the lot like a whip. Blakeson stood at the fence, face hard. He'd seen everything. He bent down, snatched up the sandwich with 2 fingers like it was trash. "This ain't a soup kitchen," he barked. "Wanna feed strays? Do it on your own time." He hurled the sandwich into a puddle. The napkin unfurled, sinking into the muddy water. Silence hit the brickyard like a dropped wrench. No one spoke. No one breathed. Caroline walked over, picked up the sandwich, gently brushed it off, rewrapped it, tighter this time, and laid it back on the cardboard. "Did you hear me, Murphy?" "Yes, sir," she said, meeting his eyes. "I heard you." She returned to her bench. The boy hadn't moved. But now, he looked at her differently. Like maybe, just maybe, someone had actually seen him. And right there, with a soggy sandwich on a cardboard square, and a yard full of silence. That's where this story began. The smallest act. The biggest moment. The rest of Caroline's shift felt like walking a narrow line. She could feel the eyes, cautious, sidelong, as if even glancing her way might cause trouble. No one said a word. They just looked away a little faster when she looked up. In a place like Fordsteel, people remembered when someone stepped out of line. And they remembered longest when it wasn't out of foolishness, but out of principle. At 3:45, the intercom buzzed loud over the conveyor noise. "Caroline Murphy, report to the supervisor's office." Immediately, a few heads lifted. Joan gave her a quick, tight glance. Something between worry and respect. Caroline wiped her hands on a rag, peeled off her work gloves, and headed down the long corridor. Blakeson's office sat behind a pane of glass, giving him a clear view of the factory floor without ever having to leave his chair. She knocked twice. "Come in and shut the door," came the voice from inside. He didn't look up from his monitor right away. Only after a few seconds did he turn toward her. There was a strange look on his face, something between irritation and smug satisfaction. He slid open a folder and held out a sheet of paper. "This is a formal warning. Violation of safety protocols and failure to follow a direct order." Caroline glanced at the paper. The ink was still fresh. The signatures barely dry. She didn't reach for the pen. Just stood there. "Sign it," he said flatly. "Second warning, you're suspended without pay. Third, you're out." She signed. Calmly. Set the pen down gently on his desk. "What I don't get, Murphy," he said, leaning back in his chair. "This isn't some church charity. We've got work to do." "He was just hungry," Caroline said, her voice even. Blake's son narrowed his eyes. "You ever think maybe it was a setup? While you're feeding the stray, someone else could be slipping into the restricted zone. You think I haven't seen that kind of trick before?" She said nothing. "Next time," he added, "take your thermos and go save the world somewhere else. We need people we can count on here, not bleeding hearts." She gave a small nod, turned, and walked out. There was no justice in what he said. But truth be told, justice had packed up and left that day long before lunch. Caroline walked home under a drizzle that misted her shoulders and clung to her hair. The street was empty. The boy was gone. Just damp footprints by the fence. And an empty piece of cardboard. But what weighed on her wasn't the weather. Or the hours on her feet. It was something heavier. That goodness, real, quiet goodness, had not only gone unnoticed. It had been punished. And still, she didn't regret a thing. Because she knew. Sometimes silence speaks louder than 1,000 arguments. And a clear conscience doesn't come with bonuses. But it's what stays with you when everything else turns against you. Evening at the Murphy house followed its usual rhythm. Her father sat by the window, blanket across his knees, flipping through a magazine and adjusting his glasses now and then. Lauren was at the kitchen table, chewing on a pen cap, earbuds in, halfway through her homework. Caroline, in a worn flannel shirt, stood at the stove slicing vegetables for stew. Her hands moved by memory. Her eyes, somewhere far off. Like the day hadn't left her, no matter how hard she tried to tuck it away. "You're somewhere else tonight," her father said as they cleared the plates. "Just tired," she replied, managing a small smile. Same old day. But it wasn't. And the day wasn't done with her yet. At exactly 7:30, there was a knock at the door, firm, precise. Not like the neighbors. Not like the mailman. Caroline wiped her hands on a towel and glanced out the window. 3 men stood on the porch, dressed in Marine Corps uniforms. Upright. Motionless. Rain dripping from their shoulders, but not a single one flinched. The man in the middle, clearly the ranking one, took a step forward and offered a crisp salute. "Miss Caroline Murphy?" "Yes," she answered, uncertain. "Sergeant James Reeves, United States Marine Corps. With me are Corporals Miller and Diaz. We've come on behalf of our commanding officer and a family to personally thank you." Caroline glanced at her father. He stood slowly, cautious, brows drawing in. "Is something wrong?" I'm not sure I understand." "May we come in?" the sergeant asked gently. "It won't take long." They entered with the kind of reverence you see in church pews. They didn't rush, didn't crowd, just stood by the doorway, as if stepping any farther without permission would dishonor the house. Sergeant Reeves reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a photo, and unfolded it with care. "Earlier today, outside the factory, you gave food to a boy. His name is Travis Connor. He's the nephew of Colonel Mark Connor." Caroline sat down. The air in the kitchen thickened, like it had been holding its breath. "He was that boy," she whispered. "Yes, ma'am," Corporal Miller nodded. "His mother, the colonel's sister, passed away last week. The guardianship paperwork got stuck in red tape. In the meantime, some neighbors took him in. But he ran away," Sergeant Reeves added. "Disappeared yesterday morning. We searched the entire town. Your sandwich," Diaz said, gave him the strength to keep walking. He remembered his uncle was a Marine and made his way to the nearest recruitment office. They recognized the last name. "Got in touch with us. He's safe now. Because someone saw him as a human being, not a problem." Caroline looked at the photo in Reeves' hand. A group of Marines surrounded by smiling Afghan children, dusty books in their hands. "The colonel wanted me to tell you," Reeves said. "A child remembers kindness, and a unit never forgets honor." The room was silent. Even her father didn't speak right away. Finally, he cleared his throat. "My daughter. She's always been that way. Sees what others walk past." Sergeant Reeves extended his hand. Resting in his palm was a coin, round, polished, engraved with the Marine Corps emblem. "This is a challenge coin," he said. "It's a token of gratitude. The colonel asked that you receive it directly. It's not given lightly. It's for those who did the right thing, when no one was watching." Caroline accepted the coin. It was cold, heavy, and real, just like everything else that had happened in the past 24 hours. But she still didn't know where this would all lead. And the story was only just beginning. Sergeant Reeves spoke with the steady cadence of someone used to delivering reports. But there was more in his voice than duty. There was something personal. Experience. Pain. Respect. "After Travis ran off," he began. "The neighbors didn't sound the alarm right away. Figured he just went out for a walk, trying to clear his head. He's only 10. Barely spoke a word since the funeral." Caroline listened, eyes fixed on the floor, but her mind had gone back to that face at the fence. The hunger wasn't just for food. It was for something lost, something broken. "He walked almost 3 hours," Miller continued. "No phone, no map, just your sandwich and the name of his uncle." Diaz leaned in. "Later, he told us, if someone gave me food without even asking anything, then maybe there's still someone out there who'll help me get the rest of the way." Caroline swallowed hard, her throat dry. This wasn't just a story about a runaway kid. It was something else, something bigger. A story about how kindness could be a compass when there's no light and no map to follow. Sergeant Reeves reached into his jacket again and pulled out a second item, a sealed envelope. "Colonel Connor is en route. He'll be here tomorrow. He wants to thank you in person. But in the meantime, he asked us to give you this." Caroline unfolded the letter. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. A soldier's hand. "Miss Murphy." Some heroes wear uniforms. Others wear aprons and steel-toe boots. "You saw my nephew when everyone else turned away. Thank you for reminding us that humanity is a discipline too. Colonel M. Connor. Her fingers trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of what was happening. The challenge coin still lay in her palm. Solid. Heavy. As if it wasn't just metal, but trust forged into something she could actually hold. Sergeant Reeves gave a soft nod. The colonel always says, he added, a child remembers kindness, and a unit never forgets honor. And in that moment, Caroline understood. What she did hadn't washed away in the muddy puddle behind the factory. It echoed, louder than any headline, far beyond the edges of Lawrenceville. And change was coming. The kind that makes people stop and ask themselves what it really means to be human. The next morning was gray, the sky dripping a steady mist just like the day before. The air smelled of wet metal, and the factory itself felt sluggish, as if it hadn't fully woken up yet. As if it, too, wasn't sure what was coming. Caroline showed up early, earlier than usual. She hoped to avoid the stairs, slip into the routine unnoticed, let the hum of work drown out the lingering unreality of yesterday. But it clung to her, the letter, the coin, the Marines at her door. None of it felt like it belonged to this world. At 8:30, a strange sound echoed through the security hall. The sharp, rhythmic stomp of boots on concrete. The guard froze. The front desk clerk turned toward the glass doors. 3 Marines walked in, dressed in full dress blues, shoulders square, eyes forward. Behind them came a 4th. Older, taller, with the bearing of someone who had led through more than just combat. His gaze held more peace than war. Colonel Mark Connor. Heads turned on the factory floor. A few machines slowed. Others kept running, but something in the air shifted. Held. People didn't walk through that factory like this. Not unless something serious was about to go down. Can I help you, gentlemen? The receptionist asked, standing up, clearly unsure. The colonel stepped forward, removed a glove, and said calmly but firmly, we'd like to speak with management and Supervisor Blakeson. It's regarding an incident that took place yesterday. 10 minutes later, the conference room was filled. The plant manager, head of HR, and Blakeson himself, sitting stiff in his chair like someone had nailed him there. His jaw was locked, but something flickered behind his eyes. Worry. From across the floor, Caroline stood behind the yellow safety line, watching as the Marines followed Colonel Connor into the glass-walled office. She saw the factory director rise from his chair, and then the whole place went quiet. Not just quiet, reverent, like the stillness before a church service. Behind closed doors, voices rose. Not shouting, just full. The colonel didn't need to raise his voice. His words carried weight without force. Miss Murphy is not in the wrong here, he said. She's the reason my nephew is alive, and not wandering scared through the streets. Sir, we have protocols. The manager started, defensive. Compassion, the colonel cut in, doesn't require protocol, and it isn't canceled out by red tape. Blakeson sat still, fists clenched in his lap. I've led security teams in war zones, the colonel went on. We know the difference between a threat and a cold, hungry kid. She figured that out faster than any of your managers did. The HR director swallowed hard. We've already reviewed the situation. The disciplinary action will be rescinded. The colonel nodded, but his face didn't soften. Good. But don't forget what happened here. A woman did the right thing and was punished for it. And the only reason you're correcting it now is because people found out. Out on the factory floor, whispers spread like sparks in dry grass. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew something had shifted. Even Blakeson could feel it, and he knew there was no stopping what had started. The colonel's words rippled through the air like a slow drumbeat, and every person who'd ever looked away from someone in need felt those words land right in their chest. Not angry, just true, because truth doesn't shout. It marches, straightforward, steady, without asking permission. Between the colonel's words and the heavy silence that settled in the room, something cracked inside Blakeson. For just a second, he wasn't sitting in a leather supervisor's chair anymore. He was back on the blistering sands of Iraq, 20 years ago. Dust in his teeth, rifle slung over his shoulder, pack digging into his spine. A child stood in front of him, dirty, shaking, hands stretched out, palms open. Blakeson had offered him a canteen and a piece of protein bar from an MRE. His commanding officer cursed under his breath. But Blake's son didn't back down. "We're supposed to be better than this," he had said. "Otherwise, why the hell are we even here?" And the kid, he smiled. Just a small, quiet smile. Blake's son still remembered it. He also remembered what happened when he came home. Civilian life dulled that voice in him, the one that knew right from wrong. Deadlines, policies, bottom lines. His marriage had fallen apart. Kids drifted away. All that remained was the job. And the fear of losing control again. He hadn't become a bad man. He'd just hardened to survive. But now, in that conference room, with the uniform standing across from him instead of on him, his silence wasn't a shield anymore. It was a confession. He looked away, and for the first time in a long, long while, he realized the armor he'd wrapped around himself wasn't made of steel. It was made of exhaustion. At first, it was just a shaky cell phone video, shot by one of the guys from shipping when the Marines walked into the factory. The footage wasn't great, tinny sound, grainy image. But the faces were clear. Caroline, the Marines, Colonel Connor. The caption was simple. They came to thank a woman for a sandwich. What did we miss? Within hours, the video hit the local Facebook group, Lawrenceville, Our Town, Our Voice. Then it showed up in the city paper. Then regional blogs picked it up. Then it went viral. Comments rolled in by the hundreds. "That was her? I worked next to her for a year, didn't even know her name. This is what honor looks like. Ford Steele should be ashamed." Sometimes one look is all it takes to know someone's the real deal. People dug up old photos from staff picnics, community events. The woman in the background, always quiet, always helping, was now center stage. Someone called for an interview. Another started a community fundraiser. The editor at the Lawrenceville Chronicle got through to Ford Steele's media office. The company responded with a formal statement. Ford Steele Manufacturing extends its sincere apologies to Miss Caroline Murphy for our mishandling of the incident. The disciplinary notice will be rescinded. We are launching a full internal review of our community response protocols. Additionally, we are initiating a children's outreach partnership with local support organizations. It was polished. It was careful. But it couldn't undo what had already happened. And the story had only just started to burn. The company scrambled to ride the wave before it crashed over them and drowned their reputation. But the folks on the floor, they knew the truth. This wasn't PR. It wasn't spin. It was fallout. From one act, one moment, one quiet woman who didn't flinch at the sight of someone else's pain. Caroline didn't show up the next morning wearing a halo. She just woke up a little early, packed lunch like always, and walked the same sidewalk back to work. Only now, people saw her differently. Not as that quiet one from line 3, but as Murphy, the one who did what was right. Joan, the same coworker who'd whispered, "You're gonna get in trouble," came over during break and sat next to her. "You know, I wanted to do the same thing. I just didn't have the guts." Caroline smiled. "He was just hungry," she said. No big speech. No dramatic music. But that's the kind of thing that sticks. That shifts the ground. Just a little. She didn't become a hero. She became something else. A symbol of what's right. Even when no one claps for it. Even when you get punished first. The workday wound down. The factory still hummed and rattled like always. But Caroline barely heard it. Inside, it was too quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm. At 4:30, when she stepped out into the evening air, Colonel Connor was waiting. He stood just beyond the gate, in the shadow of an old maple tree. Still in uniform, but without the edge of command. He nodded when he saw her. "Hope you don't mind a short walk, Miss Murphy?" "Not at all," she replied. They crossed the street and stepped into the park. At that hour, it was nearly empty. On one of the benches sat a boy. Clean clothes. Combed hair. Hands folded neatly in his lap. When he saw Caroline, he stood. Hesitated. Then walked toward her slow, unsure. Like a kid still half afraid he might be turned away. Are you the sandwich lady?" he asked softly. Caroline gave a gentle smile. "Sounds like me." He didn't hug her. Didn't cry. Just looked her straight in the eye. "Thank you." "You're welcome." "No," he said, more firmly this time. "You were the first person to actually look at me. Like, really see me. Not like I was trouble. Not like I was in the way. Like I was a person. Connor placed a hand on his nephew's shoulder. Travis is going to stay with us on base. We got everything lined up, school, doctors, even the Young Marines program. He'll be all right. Caroline nodded, something unspoken lifting inside her. He wouldn't just be safe. He'd be seen. You know, said the colonel. My nephew lost his mom. His world fell apart. And then, out of nowhere, something changed. Because of one small thing. It was just a sandwich, she whispered. Maybe so, he said. But sometimes, even the smallest thing can start something big. Travis looked up at her again, this time with a faint smile. The kind you remember, long after the moment is past. That evening, back at home, Caroline had just poured herself a cup of tea when the phone rang. It was her father, short, surprised. Turn on channel 5. Right now. Her hand trembled as she picked up the remote. On screen, the factory gate. The Marines. The headline read, "The sandwich that changed everything. A factory workers' act goes national." The report didn't sensationalize. No dramatics. No spin. Just facts. Co-worker testimonies. A short clip from Colonel Connor's speech. They called her a modern-day Good Samaritan. But Caroline just stared at the screen, hands wrapped tight around her mug. As if the warmth might vanish if she let go. The next day, a formal announcement was released. Supervisor Blake's son had been placed on administrative leave pending internal review. Company leadership unveiled a new department. Community engagement. The first initiative under the new banner. Factory in Town. A program focused on outreach for at-risk children. It felt like Fort Steele's walls had finally looked past their own shadow and decided to see the people outside. 2 weeks later, the town held its annual Veterans Appreciation Day. Normally, it was a quiet event. A few speeches, flags, polite applause. But not this year. This time, it felt like something bigger. Travis stood on stage beside his uncle, wearing a crisp jacket and slacks. The Young Marines emblem rested proudly over his heart. When they called Caroline's name, the room rose. Everyone on their feet. Applause rolled across the auditorium like thunder. She climbed the steps slowly, still in her usual coat. Still not quite believing all this was about her. Travis stepped forward and hugged her, tight, without a single word. Only when the microphones went silent. He leaned in close and whispered, barely audible, "I ate your sandwich, and it felt like Mom was still with me." It wasn't a thank you. It was something deeper. It was hope. Caroline bent down and hugged him back. For just a second, the room faded. No stage, no crowd, no applause. Just the boy who had been seen, and the woman who didn't look away. Off to the side of the stage stood Blake's son. No badge, no clipboard, just a man in plain clothes, watching. Alone. Their eyes met. He didn't step forward, just lowered his gaze. And maybe, just maybe, there was something in his look that resembled regret. Late, but still possible. 6 months passed. Fort Steele still ran on the same shift schedule, same machines, same grind. But the air felt different. The bulletin board, once covered in time cards and safety notices, now held bright flyers. Monthly lunch drive for local schools. Coordinator, Breakfast with Care, Caroline Murphy. They'd created a new department, simply named Community Initiative. Its mission, to support workers' families, partner with shelters, and coordinate volunteer efforts. And at the center of it all was her, Caroline. Not a boss, not a figurehead, just a woman people naturally gravitated toward. Every Friday, she ran gatherings in the break room. She baked cookies, brought hot cocoa, collected stories and suggestions. On one wall, mounted behind glass, was a display. That same piece of cardboard. Faded now, curled at the edges. Beneath it, a simple plaque read, "Kindness doesn't ask permission. It just shows up." Every new employee heard the story on their first day. Not as a formality, but to understand from the start. Here, people are seen. Here, people are remembered. On weekends, Caroline sometimes drove out to Camp Jefferson, where Travis now lived with his uncle. He called her Miss C, showed off his uniform, the fresh patches on his sleeve, and told her how he'd learned to polish his boots until they reflected the sky. He still woke up from dreams sometimes, but not from fear anymore. Now it was from memories that mattered. dreams where he wasn't alone. One Friday, after a factory meeting, a new guy approached Caroline. Young, a little guarded, like he hadn't figured out yet who he could trust. Miss Murphy, sorry, can I ask you something? Of course, she said. That day, when you walked to the fence, weren't you scared? You know of getting written up? Getting fired? She tilted her head slightly, offered a small, familiar smile. I was more afraid of turning away, she said. It never made the news. But that one sentence, it stuck. The people around her carried it like a quiet note in their chest. And slowly, genuinely, it started to change something in them. A year after that cold November day, Caroline Murphy sat in a grand hall lined with flags and filled with the quiet murmur of voices and silverware. It was the annual Marine Corps banquet, a fundraiser for families of service members. But this year, her name was printed in the program, listed beside the honored guests. Colonel Connor, now a little grayer than the year before, stepped up to the mic. Tonight, we have with us a woman who wasn't required to do anything, but she did exactly what was needed. No orders, no headlines, just conscience. The room rose to its feet as Caroline walked toward the stage. She was nervous, sure, but her hands were steady. They always had been. She didn't read from a card. She just looked up and spoke. I'm not a hero. I just shared half a sandwich. I didn't think it would matter. I didn't know someone's cry for help was behind that fence. But you know. She paused, and the silence in the room deepened, became sacred. A sandwich won't save the world, but sometimes it brings someone back to believing in it. Because if, in your darkest moment, someone thinks of you, then you're not lost. It means someone still sees you as a person. She nodded toward Travis, sitting at the edge of the stage in his little uniform. He nodded back, with a kind of pride that wasn't childish. It was real. And one more thing, she added. Honor doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes, it wears a work apron. That line would later be etched into a plaque at the entrance of Fort Steele, and on the park bench where Caroline first saw Travis, and in the minds of everyone who heard her story and realized. You don't have to be seen to make a difference. You just have to be human, when it matters most. If this story moved you, give it a like. Even a simple gesture can be the start of something bigger. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people who choose to see others, even when the world looks the other way. Until next time. And remember, sometimes all it takes is to really notice someone.